cleared 2 items on the agenda. And at this stage, I will be calling upon KPMG country leader to give opening remarks and officially open the session. Before he comes here, I think most of you know him, but I'll still introduce him officially. His name is called Stephen Inegate. He's a partner, country leader, KPMG in Uganda, with over 21 years audit experience. He's worked in East Africa, United States. Stephen has experience in providing financial audit services to clients in the energy and natural resources, transport, real estate, retail, consumer, industrial markets, and those in the financial services, including banks, insurance, pension funds, microfinance institutions. He's also involved in training clients in implementation of international financial reporting standards, and is building the nation through his participation as a council member of the Institute of Certified Public Accountants of Uganda, and is also chairperson of the Professional Standards Committee of the ICPAU Uganda and Fire Awards Committee. Most welcome, Stephen.
Oh, wow. Thank you, Benson. Wow. Good evening. Benson has introduced myself and is gone into detail. But for me, mine is simple. It's first of all to say we are delighted as KPMG to have you this evening. In your respective capacities, I will not attempt to identify you one by one. Allow me welcome you as clients of KPMG to this budget dinner 2022. Tonight, we have a very interesting program, basically to look at the budget, the speech made by the Honorable Minister of Finance, as well as His Excellency, and relating that to the budget, to the economic environment in which we operate at the moment. On behalf of our CEO, Benson Dungu, welcome once again to KPMG. Feel at home. When we are here, you know you are at KPMG. Allow me introduce the team I work with. There are quite a number of them, but I will just introduce a few. Just to start with our senior partner, Edgar Isengoma, who heads International Development Advisory Services, is on the other side. He's also an expert on ESG matters. So he's done a lot on that and will be adding value to clients. So Edgar is known to you and he's done a lot from an advisory perspective. The other colleague I work with in audit department is my brother, Assad Lukwago. Please, Assad. Again, he's no stranger to you, and they will be listening to him shortly, taking us through the economic outlook from the global perspective. We also have, I know Sylvia is wondering, KPMG only has male partners. What's going on? So just to appease Sylvia here, allow me to introduce Judith Erone, who is a partner in our advisory business unit, and as well as head of people. So if I don't do a good job, she can easily fire me. She's a head of people, so she's my boss. So Judith, you're welcome. And I can see you with our panelists, whom Benson will be introducing later on. Finally, Assad refers him as a darling of the media. He's a man who knows tax. Peter Chambade is a partner at KPMG and very well known to you. That's a team working with me and as their country leader to serve you. And we want to appreciate each one of you for being clients of KPMG. Without you, there is no KPMG. We also have directors around and senior managers. They are seated. Could you just stand up? the KPMG team, senior managers, directors with us, George Ople, Andrew Nekuse, Nina, Benson is here. Quite a number I see across Kadala and everybody. I will not introduce them name by name. As Benson introduced the budget to us, it's happening at a time that a lot is happening globally. And I will not get into details. But what is key for sure is if you look at this theme of the budget, it says full monetization. It speaks to the peasant farmer. So what we want to understand from the panelists tonight is what is it within this budget that is bringing the household in the village into the money economy. It speaks about agriculture, commercializing it. Aware that we have over 60% of our population residing, dwelling, earning a living within the agri sector. So looking at the theme of the budget, it identifies the key sectors within the economy that hold Uganda. When you talk of agri, services, industrialization, these are critical aspects. It concludes by referring to access to the market. Benson did speak the coming in of DRC to East African community. How accessible is that market? What provisions have been made within the budget to allow you, business community, to access that market? So we'll hear from the experts what that all means. With the, Benson did refer to the rising energy prices. Some players are happy because they are in the money economy. Others are crying. So how then do we balance this? What does it mean on one side of the business to be struggling because of rising cost of living? Staff are asking for salary increments because transport has gone up. And to the other side of business, they seem to be happy. Are they really happy? We'll hear from our experts. And we have policymakers as well who will take us through. So all of these pressures, the geopolitics within our region, of course, again, looking at the global impact of Russia and Ukraine, what does that mean? We're coming out of COVID. All of this put together, this is what's presenting the environment in which the budget has been presented to us. I will not get into those details. I will have my colleagues take us through. Otherwise, for me, is to say, let us engage, let us remain open and listen to what we have for you tonight and focus on your business and say, what are the opportunities arising out of this budget? How can I take advantage of them? Because everybody is saying times are hard. But then this is when leaders are tested. You don't need leaders when everything is balancing. Yes, I'm an accountant, I make sure entries balance. But I get value when your trial balances are not making sense and we're trying to make sense out of them. So let me not speak a lot. Let me just say thank you for honoring our invitation in your different capacities. And we want to wish you a very nice engagement, nice participation as we go through this budget insights. So thank you for coming and I wish you a nice evening. Benson, back to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stephen Ineget. I'm really happy, at least you know the rising cost of living. So you say people are demanding salary increments, so I will have to, I won't labor much. Not at KPMG, okay. Anyway, I think, thank you for the opening remarks and officially opening this session. I think I just want to highlight one or two things. You know, said a large proportion of our population is dwelling in the agriculture sector. And those who listen to the president's speech, you know, he said when he talks of food, you know, he means matoke, kalo, cassava, So I hope the experts will really enlighten us if there are other parts of, types of food or what agriculture entails and what it means for business, because what is good for business, what is good for the planet, what is good for people is good for business. Because if the people don't have earnings, then business has no business. So with that, allow me to welcome Assad Lukwago. He's a partner in audit. Assad has over 20 years of audit experience working in East Africa and United Kingdom. He has a wealth of both local and international experience in banking, telecom, energy and natural resources, private equity, pension and fund management, and in consumer and industrial markets. He's a fellow of the Association of Chartered Certified Accountants and a member of the Institute of Certified Public Accountants of Uganda and Rwanda. He has had a number of public trainings in the financial markets locally and internationally on various technical aspects. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Mr. Assad Lukwago to take us through the economic highlights and how the cassava means business.
Thank you so much, Benson. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm personally very, very pleased after 2 years of lockdown, where we are always hiding behind screens and not engaging, not seeing each other. I'm actually humbled by the number of people who have turned up. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming. As I learn how to use my gadget, we're going to, first of all, look at the, while doing the macroeconomic analysis, as usual, we're going to look at the global perspective. And then we shall zoom into the local perspective before we go into the tax affairs. Why do we have to look at the global first? I think over time we've done it, but this particular year, I think all of you now are witnesses to why we've always had to do this. Because when you look at what is going on right now in the world, there is no single demand or supply shock event that has caused the rising prices in food, fuel, and all other suppliers. There's no single event that you can point your finger at. So it's a combination of so many things, all of them conniving at the same time. Of course, you had the pandemic, for starters, disrupting the actual normal production, leave alone health. But then later on, as economies eased, then the supply demand shocks came in. Then before we were all settled, Russia decides to attack Ukraine. Then the Chinese have to, wipe out COVID. So it's a combination of so many factors. And to me, that's what I call the perfect storm. It's a result of the perfect storm that has caused the rising prices of everything. And it's a balance of demand and supply. I tried to, put some sort of weighing scale there, where you're seeing clearly that as we were turning over after COVID-19, there was so many, in fact, even before COVID, there were so many factors, so many policies that were put in place to boost economic development, and they were actually very successful in doing so. We had credit reliefs, then eventually we had lockdowns being lifted. Monetary policies were always eased to ensure that economies continue to survive during the pandemic. Then what happened with that is that demand actually, once then the pandemic cleared, demand picked up so quickly. In fact, we were on course. 2021 was on course to be one of the fastest recoveries from a recession for 80 years since the Second World War. So demand picked up so quickly, but then what happened is that supply did not move at the same speed because we had so many disruptions in supply chains where many factories were closed, many shipping routes were closed, many operations had been closed. Reigniting them to match the quick recovery in demand created an imbalance where you had more demand but lesser supply. Then you had an attack, Russia attacking Ukraine, and with the sanctions that came about, we shall look at those in a little bit more detail. Then what happened again? any other produce, commodities, oil and gas that come out of Russia were further, supply chains were further crushed in that area. So again, disrupting supply further. China, which is considered to be the world's manufacturing hub, came up with an agenda of zero COVID-19, and they went into full lockdown in February, and therefore general supplies to the world's producers shrunk, because whatever you had to get from Russia, sorry, from China, it had been disrupted. Then we had energy specific shocks. So a combination of all these suppressed supply, yet demand had been boosted because of all the fiscal and monetary policies to recover from the pandemic. And that is exactly what has caused the high prices almost in every single aspect that you can look at. I'm going to pick out specific items. One, energy, then I'll look at foods, and then other general supplies, as to dig deep a bit into what caused the specific shocks in those areas. For energy shocks, energy, we mean oil, gas, coal, electricity, the entire chain, prices went up for everything. I've talked about the COVID-19 hangover. As demand for energy or for oil and gas fell, so did supply. Why? Because processing facilities were shut down or reduced because aviation was down, transportation was down, therefore supplies had to be reduced. And then for that period since 2020 to 2021, if there were any routine maintenances and servicing, all of them were postponed. And if you look at the map that I've put up there, we had almost across the entire world routine maintenances and shutdowns for oil and gas processing facilities. All of them had to happen in 2021, because for the year 2020, they had not done any of that. And when that happens, general supplies of oil and gas, therefore, had to be affected. That then coincided with the weather coincidences. We had the toughest, coldest winter in Europe, matched with the hottest, I don't know that call it summer in Asia. And the winter in Europe caused high demand for gas because they use gas for heating. The hot temperatures in Asia again caused high demand for gas because they use it for air conditioning. That alone, combined with this routine maintenance, caused a shortage. You know, the gas reserves were used up. Then people had to resort to other means of heating or cooling. So they had now to power electricity generation using coal. I know there are some people here who are passionate about ESG. Surprisingly and quietly, governments have gone back to use of coal, reopening factories, energy companies that had been shut down, factories that had been shut down while transiting to a cleaner energy. But they had no option because they had to heat up. So now that was coupled with the fact that carbon credits had already gone up in terms of the cost for them. Therefore, whoever was generating electricity using coal, the cost of that electricity had to be higher. So you're having gas costs going up, of course, petroleum products costs going up. Now you have also electricity costs going up because of the combination of using coal, revamping the factories that were shut down, high carbon credits as well. They have to factor all that into the cost of electricity. So all this created a situation that had inevitably to increase energy prices. Then the Asian economy grew very fast. In fact, fast enough that all supplies were not enough to match that economy. You had the Nord Stream, that's a pipeline from Russia going to Germany. It had its politics even before the war in Ukraine. And I think because the Russians had more capacity to supply more oil and gas to Europe, but they withheld it a little bit because they wanted to force the Nord Stream pipeline to be commissioned. Of course, eventually it didn't happen and it's been overtaken by events, but they cut down supplies to Europe before even the war, just to get the Nord Stream opened. And that as well reduced the supply. And then ultimately the war, where now you had sanctions on Russia and then self-sanctions on others who don't want to demand Russia or to buy Russian oil and gas, again, causes increases in petroleum products and all related items. So on the overall, that was the just perfect storm to cause energy shocks globally, which then inevitably affect us. I could have gone on and even link it back to Uganda, because of course, if all of us are now going to be bringing from Middle East, including the Europeans who are no longer sanctioned themselves against buying from Russia, then we get squeezed out, we as Africans, because then supplies are fewer, and then the producers don't want to revamp production, because why should they? After all, they're getting more money. So then food prices is another that we're facing, all of us. Were you aware that Russia and Ukraine combined, they export close to 25% average of wheat, barley, maize, cereals to the whole world? Approximately 25%. That's the extreme end column, the one that shows total. That is the total world exports. The total in the middle is their actual production. Why the production is lower than the total exports is because not all countries that produce in the world export, but Russia and Ukraine produce excess beyond what they have. So they control a lot. Now, if you have a war going on, it is very difficult for a farmer to be planting maize or wheat, isn't it? So clearly, supplies to all of us had to shut down. And therefore, also, the things that were sanctioned fastest were these sorts of things, because they are not energy in nature. So the supplies to all of us coming in from Russia had to be affected. Now comes sunflower seed oil. Even me personally, I didn't know that between Russia and Ukraine, they control 75% of the world's sunflower seed oil. 75%. Disrupt that, then we all have a problem. And where do you manufacture soap from? They are byproducts of sunflower seed, sunflower oils. That's where soap ingredients, some of them come from. So when you therefore have a bar of soap jumping from 4K to 8,000, these are some of the reasons. The war in Ukraine, of course, everyone will blame the war in Ukraine, but one can easily also blame the sanctions. The war can happen without the sanctions and all of us are happy, but whatever is going on is going on. Now, so I was talking there before was the slide on the global exports of wheat and cereals and everything. Were you aware that we as Ugandans import over 30% of our cereals from Russia and Ukraine? In fact, when I showed this to someone, he said, we are not serious. With all this weather and good soil, how could we, import that much from so far in winter? Wheat, we import almost 50% of our wheat from Russia and Ukraine. Therefore, disruption in that area automatically causes disruptions. And no wonder, His Excellency was right to tell us, you guys just eat cassava, because we can't allow to be importing all this much wheat, from far from Russia when we can do it for ourselves. So these are the reasons why we're having high food prices. Then comes fertilizers. Between Russia, actually specifically Russia, they control a huge percentage. They're the world's largest producers of nitrogen, the fourth largest producers of nitrogen fertilizers and phosphate fertilizers in the world. And now when you have gas prices going up, the factories that are used to process those fertilizers are operating at high costs. Therefore, general costs of fertilizers are also going up. And this is the period where globally it's the planting season, let me call it. People are in spring, now crossing into summer. This is the period that they are supposed to be planting. Now, if you have a shortage of fertilizers because of the disruptions in Russia, Ukraine, I don't foresee a situation where food prices are actually going to come down, unless His Excellency was right again to say for him, the only food you understand is kalo and kawunga. He was doing this, I don't know, he had a name for that, yeah? So I tell you what, guys, I don't foresee us getting out of this problem in the next 1 to 2 years. It might ease around 2024, because now this planting season is going to be disrupted across the world. How are we going to recover from this? So then as we are settling on food and energy costs, there comes the Chinese with their zero COVID policy. In February, Shanghai was hit by one of the worst attacks from the pandemic. And therefore, around 14th of March, they chose to close down almost the world's largest port in Shanghai. And therefore, automatically, that had an impact on all of us who import stuff from China. And the industries that were most affected, you had the automobile industry and the telecom industry specifically. And most of you people who are in procurement, I know even our IT people, whenever we were trying to buy anything, even computers, they were taking ages. Why? Little chips and whatever that goes into those components. Even cars, I think some of you who are from the likes of Toyota, cars coming, because many inputs come from China. And because of that, from February to now, all of us were in a situation where the supplies are low. So we are in a world where demand is high, but supplies generally of food, energy, and general supplies is low. And if you look at the graph there, January, China exported 327 billion worth of exports to the rest of the world. In February, before they even locked down, when they were hit by that pandemic, the exports dropped by almost 100 billion, in just 1 month. Then just grew up a little bit in March, April, but all that period they were operating in a lockdown to now, up to today. And you see that line, the black line there, it's not an error, it's not a crack on the screen. It's just showing you that the general exports average are coming down from the highs of late 2021. So if all of us, we don't have inputs from China, we are not able to do whatever we want to do. If you're setting up a factory with a milk processing and some of the inputs are supposed to come from China, your factory will not move at the same speed as you would have wanted. So therefore, all of us end in a situation of general low supplies with high demand. And therefore, that creates an imbalance. So that is the perfect storm of causing high prices because of high demand and low supplies across board. And that means that we are going to be in a situation where we are going to be in a stagnant economy, but with high inflation. In economics, that's called stagflation. Dr. Muhumza, you will have to explain probably this more to people. A situation where some key sectors are in recession. You can now probably pick on your own from what I've said. Then you have high action is not happening. Then ineffective policies, that line at the bottom, that's where minutes remaining. Ineffective policies, not deliberately. For example, if you're in a situation, I was talking to some of the bankers here, you are in a situation where it has been increased to suppress demand. Our problem is not the demand that is too high unnaturally. It's the supply that doesn't exist. You should be doing policies that increase supplies, but we are all stuck because this is now a global situation of stagflation until 2024. So overall, those are the factors that have driven general performance globally and even regionally. And if you look on the purple column there, the Eastern Europe GDP, the economies are going to contract. That includes also Russia. And those revisions, the second column in there, the revisions from the origins. So the world's GDP growth has been revised downwards by 1.2% from the previous projections. If you look at the commodity prices, energy, fertilizers by 69% and other commodities by 19.2% globally. Therefore, when we're in the whole world, most of this is all now imported inflation. Regionally, we're doing far better, especially in East Africa. In the situation we're in, you will not say that you're doing well, but in the situation the world is in, we are doing slightly better. If you look at our numbers in terms of the GDP, inflation has gone slightly above where BOU normally wants. Target. Middle income citizens, at least there's some good news. Yes, today officially the Minister of Finance announced that we reached a GDP per capita of 1,046, and we're about $9 above what is required. I hope exchange rates don't move tomorrow. The minister refused to mention this, but the president said, no, the doors opened, no one is going to push you out. We are now a middle income country. But to me, what I would say, we still have so many people who are still poor. And you would hope that then we try to migrate as many as possible into that middle income. But the way all of you look, you just say hello to your neighbor, may it be the one who is in the middle income, and you may not be aware. And as I hand over to Dr. Muhumuza, I'm just preempting Dr. Muhumuza's part. I'm not supposed to touch the Ugandan budget environment, but I personally have always been concerned about the alignment of our budget to NDP3. The allocation in the productive sector versus the complementary sector. And it has never really worked for me. I'm not going to comment too much about this, but all you can say from this is that generally, our total budget is the 48.1 trillion, the column in the middle, but it is not totally in compliance with NDP3. First, in terms of the general total collections that is supposed to come in, but also in the allocation in itself. And the parts that normally get affected first are the ones that are more priority. So with that, I would like to close and then hand back to the chairman as you introduce the next person. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Assad, for taking us through the global economics. I'm not the best with numbers. I will not speak to what Assad has spoken. So to bring this at home, to discuss the economic outlook in accordance with the budget that was read today is none other than Dr. Fred Muhumuza. He's a holder of a PhD from the University of Manchester. He has masters in economic policy and planning from Makerere University. He has experience of over 27 years in the development policy, research and analysis. He also has a teaching career. He teaches both at Makerere and Chambogo universities. He has worked as an economic advisor with Ministry of Finance. He's a research fellow of the Economic Policy Research Center. He has worked with KPMG as a senior manager, among so many roles that he has played. He also sits on various boards, Bank of Baroda, Uganda Christian University, and many others. So please join your hands to welcome Dr. Fred Muhumza to walk us through the economic outlook.
Thank you, Dorcas, for the kind introduction. Good evening, everybody. Never mind whether you are in middle income or not, you have to sustain that for 3 years. Otherwise, you just walked into the lobby of the middle income status. And for that, I'm going to disobey Dorcas. He says, I walk you through, I'm going to run you through. Because I need to go back and work on the basics that are left out there. If this doesn't work, blame either Benson or Assad, not Dorcas. Anyway, be greeting your neighbor in the meantime. There are a number of things that usually go with the government budget, which you can say are not said, but they actually are applicable, and we need to point out these to ourselves. I have listened to 2 important statements from government that apparently seem to be contradictory, and that's what I want to bring to you. You'll go back and read them. One is the statement by Bank of Uganda when they increased the CBR. They said the outlook is a little bit challenged, and they mentioned quite a number of things that we'll see. But the minister has a very good optimistic outlook. So you need to balance out between the monetary and the fiscal policy. What do you want to go to trust more? Or how are you going to balance those two? So the economic outlook, we'll just look at a few things here. This graph, we have discussed it with friends earlier on. You look at the trend lines, because sometimes when you analyze the budget and you look at one particular year, and quite often we talk about this growth was 4.5 compared to 3.5 last year, but those are just 2 years. So you want to pick a trend. What has the trend been even before COVID? So the blue lines are showing you how fast the budget has been increasing. And then that other zigzag line is showing you what growth we have got out of those investments. And the trends are really telling you from 2015-16 going onwards what have been the trends. So even as the budget trends upwards, growth has been trending downwards. And the COVID may have amplified that, but the trend was somehow there, either flat or a little bit. So you have challenges of translating the budget into realities, because you would want both to move in the same direction. And I think that's the first challenge that the minister needs to look into, and government, and even ourselves, before we celebrate the middle income status. We might bounce there and bounce back. So what gave the minister an optimism that the economy will grow and projected at 6.5 per annum in the coming times is the full reopening of the economy. That can be good and bad, because as Assad has mentioned, at times the reopening brings out demand which is faster than actually the supply can manage. And then the economy in reaction triggers inflation to try and tell you guys go slow. And if you do not do that, so depending on how you manage the inflationary pressures, you might actually collapse the economy back into either stall, or it can even get down. So reopening should not be celebrated entirely. We need to manage that reopening. The increase in global demand for some of the commodities we produce, which is a good thing. But are we ready to put a soybean and replace Ukraine? It's possible, because soybean takes 3-4 months to mature. So if we plant it in August, we'll be ready to put soybean on the global market. But knowing how slow in Uganda we do our things, you wonder whether that is something positive for us to celebrate. Because India imports soybean worth about $10-12 billion from Ukraine. And since they are fighting, they are not planting that. So India will be looking for alternative sources. And I think our relations with the Indians should have helped us. But are we ready to sink and plant soybean? Those are the issues you want to say. Can we actualize the medium-term outlook that the minister has given and make it a reality? It's an opportunity out there, but it requires us to do those things by making sure the budget speaks to the realities. Again, this is composite index. In the budget speech, you'll find we talked about the composite index of economic activity. This is generated by Bank of Uganda on a monthly basis. And it indicates that it has increased by 4.3% and represents the underlying forces on national economy. But when you give it a trend to say, okay, what has it been over the last 2 years? Again, you pick a downward trend from it. The initial spike was a COVID impact, but you still see that going forward, we are yet to turn that trajectory upwards. So what we do with this budget is still lying out there. The lions are still in-house, and we require to manage them well. There are critical observations that Parliament made in appropriating this budget, and you can read them there. The total nominal public debt to GDP. Now, sometimes the minister writes and stops in December 2021 about the debt that was there. And you wonder whether the minister doesn't know what the debt was as of 31st May 2022. But sometimes you want to avoid a 50% increase. But Parliament picked it up in the presentations that we seem to be crossing or have crossed the 55%, and we need to be mindful of that. You have total domestic interest payments. Quite often people want to speak of debt to GDP, but the real operating parameter is usually, because you don't use GDP to pay debt. You use your revenues, you use your exports. So usually we find those indicators a little bit more representative, and we had set parameters there, which we think we have passed. So it's time to see how do we get back over the medium term on those parameters. And this is part of the Charter of Fiscal Responsibility, which is the agreement between the Ministry of Finance and its other partners on how it needs to go forward. So there are a number of things to correct, and we need to see whether this budget is speaking to them. There are also key observations and some concerns that economic growth projected in that range. That was the range earlier on. These were range observations, some of them raised by the central bank. We have an increased uncertainty in the global financing markets, tightening of monetary conditions by the developed world, who are raising interest rates really to curb inflation, is definitely going to affect us, because part of our borrowing is determined by these global rates. You're talking of LIBOR peaks out of some of these, but also some of the people who bring money here, what we call domestic financing, actually have options. When interest rates begin to rise, in the history, in the past, we have seen reflows of some of the monies coming out of the emerging markets into those stronger markets. So the behavior of what the Fed does out there is something we need to be observant about. These are risks going forward during implementation. The war in the DRC and insecurity in Karamoja are things we should not ignore. They certainly were not to the level that they are when these budget proposals were submitted to Parliament, but you cannot ignore them, knowing how Mr. Museveni is so passionate about security. He would rather cancel the increase of salaries for teachers and first settle the security, which is the right thing to do, because you don't want to pay your salary teachers and then they get killed. But then they won't be happy with you. So these are some of the disturbing things we need to keep watching out there. And then, of course, the BOU sometimes has some good concerns that we need to also be looking at going forward. There are risks in financing the budget, and this was actually the assessments done by the Ministry of Finance itself in the background to the budget framework paper that was submitted to Parliament in December. And they took note of some of these things that I thought we should be able to look at, that if there is a 1 percentage point reduction in real GDP, it will reduce revenues by that much in this particular year, and the resulting deficit would increase borrowing. Some of these things we have seen them happen because government has had to increase borrowing in this particular year because of revenue shortfalls. But also the depreciation in the exchange rate, they were talking about if it is by about 10%, that increases government spending which offsets the increase in revenues. Of course, depreciation means people who are paying taxes based on the dollar rate will pay a little bit more, so government gains. But remember, the depreciation also affects government since it also consumes the same items that are being driven by the depreciation. So it will offset that benefit. So that's why I think Assad is mentioning we need to watch where the exchange rate is going over time, because that may disrupt the government budget, including our own budgets. And if that goes higher, then it means the GDP divided by the exchange rate will take us back into the lower income status. We just need to keep watching that figure. If it goes to 4,000, definitely there is no remain in middle income status. And there's another one, that 10% increase in the price of imports would reduce the imports and import duties by URA by almost 300 billion, but it would also raise government expenditure by almost 400 billion. These were assessments done in December. Now we all know that fuel prices have gone up by over 50%, not the 10% that was being mentioned. So these are realities and we need to reflect them, but I did not see them carried through the budget, much as in the initial submissions, they were in there. In economics, we don't deal with the good things. So if you don't hear some good things here, leave them, they are okay. We don't treat those who are well off. You want to look at what might derail your structure and your plan. And of course, we have some other things on the extreme side which you may want to read with time and check them out. As I said, I'm not going to walk you through, I'll run you through. This again is growing interest payment. That's the trend we are going to be having. Well, we have in the budget speech some kind of hiccup on the interest payments, reading about 4.6 or 4.7 trillion if you go by the budget speech. But that was after Parliament tampered with the money meant for interest payment and reallocated it. The real interest payment, as per the figures, should be about 6 trillion. Now that's a big concern for us because this is money URA must look for to pay interest. Now, it would be good if the interest is coming out of projects that actually delivered the growth. But as I've shown you earlier, the budget is going up and the growth is not responding. So where are we getting the money for interest should be a concern to us who want to stay in the middle income status. This was consideration of the true cost of debt. We don't consider the cost of debt as debt to GDP. You try to look, as anybody who did economics in senior 5 first term, they taught you something called opportunity cost. You have just had your meal. What else would you have used that money for? So you don't say this meal has cost me 50,000. No, the true cost of that meal is the other thing the 50,000 should have done. And it was on this background that in the 90s, Uganda was able to negotiate for highly indebted poor debt relief initiatives, because we said in the payment of interest, we are unable to treat the sick. We are unable to bring every child to school. So everybody saw that argument and said, okay, we are forgiving you debt, but use the money for health, use the money for education. And we started universal primary education and later on secondary education. And the president was saying, we still have issues there because the children are disappearing somewhere between primary and secondary. But that's the case we put out there. So whoever is saying you debt to GDP as a ratio in trying to manage debt and assess debt is using the wrong indicator. The true indicator is how much of your revenues are going to debt repayment and or how much of your export, the debt to export ratio. And as depreciation goes through, we are watching that closely with the central bank because the argument is if the shilling depreciates, then you are going to need more shillings to buy the same dollar to go and pay the donors. And then you might deplete your reserves. That's the point the president was making when they said, can't we reduce some taxes? Can't we subsidize? He said, you'll be doing hemorrhage on our reserves. Our reserves are just about 4.5 months of imports. We measure them by the months of imports, how much they can support. So 4.5 months of imports is not something that big. And I've had the conversations on coffee, people saying coffee is a brilliant thing. Coffee can only support our imports for 1 month. So surely you can see how vulnerable we are. All the coffee we export in a year can support the imports for just 1 month. Gold, possibly for 3 months. So between the two, they can give us the 4 months. So you need to keep watching that space because you don't want to wake up and you are Sri Lanka. All of a sudden, it is possible really to become a Sri Lanka in 2 months or even 4. That's why we want to watch these parameters that are extra in addition to debt to GDP ratio. I wanted to put this down here for our conversation, and you can deal with it later, because quite often people say the central bank rate has gone up. The central bank rate is a signal. It is just like the red light. You can still drive through it and there won't be any problem, as long as you are careful that both of you have not decided to drive through the red light. So at midnight, you can dare it. So it's a signal telling you, please stop. But if you see nothing, maybe you try your luck. Police might watch you. So the CBR is that signal. But the real operative rates that determine allocation of money are these particular rates. So when you see the lending rate being up, what is driving it? Where do people put their money? And sometimes we say, if you lend to government, you are crowding out what should have gone to the private sector. That's just the smaller part of the story. Our banks have sufficient liquidity to lend both to government and the private sector. But the problem is the private sector itself, when they have their money, 10 billion, they don't need a bank. But now government is saying, if you can lend me that money for 365 days, treasury bills, which is 1 year, I'm going to give you 8.8%. I'm going to give you 10%, and these rates are rising. Now, that's the bigger problem of government borrowing. You move people from setting up farms and schools and hospitals into locking up money in treasury bills. And as we speak, the government borrowing is 27.7 trillion or thereabout. Meaning this is money that should have been in the economy, generating soybean for the Indians, generating wheat for us to survive the Russians, but it's now somewhere sitting with government, and government is saying, I'm not very sure what I did with it, but I took it. Now you need to answer those questions. Now, if you look on the other extreme end, you can see really you have a problem of if somebody is lending to government, and those rates have been going up between February 2022 and March. If you look at the 2-year bond, the 5-year bond, the 10-year bond, but we are more clustered on the 2-year bond. And Mr. Museveni calls this his money. That is, I think, something we need to really engage in. Says, I have my money. Borrowed money has never been your money. I'm using my money to build my roads. No, this is not your money, Mr. President. 27 trillion belongs to other people. But now the other challenge we are having, which we want to engage government and have discussions on, is when you borrow a 2-year bond and you want to build a road that takes 5 years to build, you're going to have a debt asset mismatch. Because this 2-year bond is going to mature in 2 years. The road is not yet started. So how would that loan pay back itself? Then that's why you'll have a refinancing carry on, which is right now at 8 trillion. So the budget has no fiscal space. We are saying we are kind of limited and hemmed in. The retro you have can hardly give you the flexibility to do what you want to do. Because even before you start budgeting, the debt itself is going to be about 30 to 35% of the budget component. The remaining part, 6 trillion, is salaries and wages. And then you have statutory institutions, things like parliament. What they do with their money after, we only read about it. We don't even check their budget, and you cannot manage their budget because they are the ones to appropriate. So really the degrees of freedom of Minister Kasai and his team are very, very limited. It's like finding yourself on Kitante Road, you're in a jam, you just switch off your engine. You don't want your Minister of Finance to be able to be trapped in that kind of thing. So we must find ways going forward on how do we discover space for the Minister of Finance to be able to address the current conditions. Right now, he has a problem of doing that. I think that face is not mine, certainly. I don't know who is supposed to introduce that face, but at that point, I want to appreciate your attention.
Thank you, Doctor, for that elaborate analysis. For interest of time, like Benjamin Franklin says, nothing is certain except death and taxes. So to shed light on what tax amendments have been introduced on from the various tax laws in this post-lockdown period is none other than Mr. Peter Chambade. Peter Chambade is the head of tax and regulatory services at KPMG. He has over 21 years of experience in providing tax advisory services to many of our clients in the public and private sector. He's a certified accountant. He's a fellow of the Association of Chartered Certified Accountants. He's a member of VISPAO, and with great honor, allow me welcome Peter Chambade.
Thank you very much, Dorcas. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for honoring our invitation to be here. And we are just going to go through some of the physical measures or the tax measures that are going to take effect from 1st of July. We are all aware that this process starts around March, when the minister tables this to Parliament and then debated by Parliament. Views from the public are obtained until a point when these become law and are assented to by the president. As of today, what we are aware, the president has assented to the Income Tax Amendment Act, the VAT Act, the Stamp Duty Act, the Tax Procedures Code Act, and the Tax Appeals Tribunal Act. To the best of my knowledge, the Excise Duty Act is yet to be assented to by the president. And hopefully, once it is assented to, then we will also give you that information. All these acts that have been assented to take effect from 1st July 2022. As highlighted, our budget in the year 22-23 is 48.1 trillion. But out of that budget of 48.1 trillion, it is anticipated that 23.754 trillion is going to be from tax revenue. 23.754 will be from tax revenue. The outturn expected, according to the minister, for the year 21-22 is 21.4 trillion, which means there's going to be an increment in revenue expected by 10.5% this year. And also the minister noted that the performance of revenue for this year that is ending 30th June, it is anticipated that there's going to be a deficit of 939 billion. So it is important then for all of us to know about the tax measures so that we have the knowledge and ensure that we apply the laws appropriately. The minister also said he's not increasing taxes, but the focus is going to be on enhanced domestic revenue mobilization, which means what is anticipated, more efficiency by URA to collect the revenues, and which means it's expected that we become much more compliant, probably, than we have been. Because as we are aware, tax revenues are necessary for development of any nation. So what are some of the key items that we need to be aware under the different tax heads? Under the Income Tax Act, it is important for us to note that for entities that would expect to benefit from the double tax treaties, there is a concept of beneficial ownership for you to be able to benefit from the preferential rates in the double tax treaties, then you have to be a beneficial owner of that income that is being sourced from Uganda. And for you to be considered a beneficial owner, the amendment is telling us they'll be looking at the natural person who ultimately owns or controls a customer or a natural person on whose behalf the transaction has been conducted. So we are looking at the natural person. So if we have companies interposed up to the entity that is in the treaty country, it will be going through those interposed companies to look at the natural person who either controls or owns that income. And to the extent that that natural person is a resident of that country, then the double tax treaty will apply. This is critical, especially for entities when you are paying non-residents who are saying they're in treaty countries, to ensure that before you apply, let's say, a rate of 10% instead of 15, you make sure that actually the beneficial ownership provision has been met. The other change that is coming in is for purposes of ensuring that research institutions are encouraged, as long as they are not for profit. And for research institutions which are not for profit, their income is going to be exempted. Another change that has come through income tax is in relation to transport services for goods or passengers embarked from outside Uganda. So if you have a non-resident service provider and is providing transport services, and those services are goods which is bringing into the country, but we are embarked from outside Uganda, that is not taxable in Uganda because it will not be taken as having been sourced from Uganda. And in that respect, I know there has been contention, sometimes different officers thinking that this should be taxed, such that such a non-resident, when they receive that income, they should be taxed withholding tax at a rate of 15%. That has been clarified in this provision, that no tax will apply on such. This, I believe, is of interest to many people because either individuals have rental properties or some companies have rental income. When it comes to rental income, the change in the law is as such that last year they indicated that the rate applicable for individuals and companies was to be 30% after allowing 75% of that income as expenses. There was a discussion as to whether that should be verified expenses or not. So that there's a little bit of debate on that. However, it should be noted that this year there's been another change to the extent that for individuals now, for the rental income that you earn, they will allow you a threshold of 2.82 million. So if you have property and your total income is only 2.82 million a year, then you will not pay any tax. But for any income above 2.82 million, you will be taxed at a rate of 12%. Last year, you are being taxed on income less 75% of your expenses, and then you are taxed at 30%, which was giving an effective rate of about 7.5%. Now the rate is 12% on any income above 2.82 million. Then for companies, the law was such that to the extent that you could verify 100% of your expenses, then they would be allowed for tax purposes, and the excess, you would suffer tax at 30%. The rate for companies has remained 30%, but what has changed? The expenses which allowed for companies, they will be limited to 50% of the rental income for a given year, which effectively it means whatever income you earn as a company, it is going to be taxed at 15%, regardless of whether you have made a loss for that particular year or not. So the minister said he has not increased taxes. However, for that particular provision, I believe he has increased taxes. And from the policymakers, my only concern is rental income is the returns on rental income are really very long. And with a growing population, we really need real estate development. So I hope the measures put in place are not going to discourage investment in this area. From a VAT perspective, some of the key changes are when it comes to imported services. Because when I deal with a non-resident and I pay for services to a non-resident, that is termed as an imported service. And the law until last year was to the extent that when I have that imported service, I have to make a declaration to the Uganda Revenue Authority and pay 18% of the value of the service. Last year, there was an amendment which brought in a provision that when I get that service, to the extent that that service is feeding into an exempt service within Uganda, for example, financial institutions whose financial services are exempt, to the extent that I could prove that that service I'm getting was furthering provision of that exempt service I give in Uganda, then I would not pay VAT on that imported service. That has been repealed, and the reason is from a competition perspective. If similar services were provided by a resident, let's say to a bank, if they are going to suffer tax, then why shouldn't the non-resident also, you who is importing, why wouldn't you pay VAT? So from a competition perspective, then for purposes of encouraging people to take local services, that's the reason why that has been repealed. Then one which I think is of a lot of interest for people who supply government is the fact that there's been an amendment effective 1st July that if you supply government, then you only account for VAT on cash basis. Because government normally takes long to pay. And I know some businesses that have gone out of, actually that have closed because they borrowed to finance their supplies to government. They borrowed to finance VAT up to a point that they could no longer manage to pay their debts, and they closed. So I think this is a very, very welcome development. The first schedule was amended to include the International Development Organization, so that now it is going to be exempted from VAT, which means it can also claim input VAT suffered. And they just also ensured that they changed DFID to FCDO because that changed some time back. I think the other key aspect is to note what has been exempted, supplies that have been exempted. Those like oxygen for medical use to encourage or to reduce the cost of this. The cylinders, oxygen cylinders were exempted previously, but now the oxygen that goes in there for medical use has also been exempted to make it more affordable. Then supply of assistive devices for persons with disability like wheelchairs, those have been exempted also to make them more affordable. And supply of airport user services charged by the Civil Aviation Authority, also to make to make it a little bit cheaper for the people who are transiting through our airport, that has been exempted. Hopefully that will also help to attract tourists. Then there are some items that have been zero rated, like menstrual cups. Prior to this amendment, these were exempted, but now they have been zero rated, which is better than exemption, because if you are dealing in zero rated supplies, then you can claim your input, related input. And this is in line with the zero rating already that existed for sanitary towels and inputs therein. They have also exempted educational materials manufactured in the ESC, that is the East African Community Partner States. Already, there was an amendment in the law whereby educational materials which were produced within Uganda were zero rated, and then educational materials, other educational materials, remained within the exempt schedule. So to also give an advantage to the ESC, given that we are part of the ESC, so to the extent that you purchase educational materials originating from East African countries, then those will also be zero rated. Then for purposes of encouraging people to invest in health facilities like hospitals, to the extent that you are investing $5 million and above, that would be exempted. Originally, they had indicated that it should be at a level of a national referral hospital. That has been removed to make it open to the extent that I'm going to invest in a hospital, whether it is at national referral hospital level or not, and I'm investing $5 million and above, then all the supplies to that development will be exempt from VAT. From a customs perspective, members should note that every 5 years, the Council of Ministers sit to decide HS codes applicable. And in this respect, it should be noted that the HS codes that were being used and applied as we are applying the East African Community Common External Tariffs were of 2017, and they are going to expire 30th of June, 2022. So the new codes, which are also going to take into account several changes within the nature of trade, like the technology which has come in, which will be for the year 2022 onwards for 5 years that are coming in. And we should check for those changes, given that the classification of some of the goods are going to change. And we have started having a monthly customs newsletter. The first newsletter came out this month, and there are details that you will see in there. If you do not have a copy, given that we have your contact, we'll send it to you. Then it should be noted also that moving forward, effective 1st July 2022, there is a new band for the customs external tariffs that has been introduced of 35%. The general rates currently were 0 for raw materials, 10% for semi-finished goods, and then 25% for finished goods when you are importing them from outside East Africa. Now there is a new band of 35%, which mainly deals with what would be termed as sensitive goods like cereals, dairy and meat products, which we believe we should be able to produce in sufficient quantities in East Africa. So bringing them in could either clog the entities that are producing them from here. So that is to discourage. So they have increased the rate to 35%. Things like furniture, edible oils, and so on. Importing them effective 1st July 2022 could be at a higher rate than 25% if it was applicable to them previously. As I indicated, the Excise Duty Act has not yet been assented to by the president. From the information I have, there are still some discussions going on. But there are certain proposals. For example, there was a proposal to reduce excise duty from 20% to 12% for peg beer. There was a proposal to provide excise duty of 80% or shillings 1,700 per liter, whichever is higher, in respect of any undenatured spirits that is locally produced or of alcoholic strength. Like excise duty was being introduced at a rate of 20% on sugar, confectionaries, chewing gum, sweets, and chocolates, which means if that is provided and it passes, then the cost of those would go higher. But as I said, those are still being discussed. When the final act comes into play, we'll communicate. There are other acts where amendments have been made. For example, the Stamp Duty Act, whereby stamp duty has been removed on an agreement relating to deposit of title deeds and pawn pledges. This is currently at 1%. But for purposes of making it cheaper for people to get loans, the stamp duty on this instrument has been removed. Then for purposes of encouraging people to take agriculture insurance and to make it more affordable, also stamp duty on agriculture insurance policy has been removed. Originally it was 35,000 Uganda shillings. Then stamp duty on security bond and mortgage deed has also been removed. Originally it was 1%. This is also to encourage or to make borrowing a little bit cheaper. And they have clarified that for any trust document concerning property, you have to pay stamp duty of 15,000. From a tax procedure code perspective, we know for you to be represented at the Uganda Revenue Authority, you are supposed to appoint a tax agent. And people who represent people or taxpayers at Uganda Revenue Authority are supposed to be registered with the Uganda Revenue Authority as tax agents. And they get a certificate of registration, which now they are clarifying it will be valid from the point it is issued until 31st December of that year it is issued. There are several penalties that have been introduced within the Tax Procedure Code. As the minister said, one way they are going to raise revenue is enhancing domestic revenue mobilization, which means that also offenses for non-compliance are going to be increased to deter people from being non-compliant. So some of the offenses that the Tax Procedure Code has brought into play are if you fail to activate tax stamps. We know there are goods now whereby if you are producing them or you are importing them, you must put a stamp. Like the water we are drinking, you must have a stamp. If you do not have that tax stamp, then you are going to have a penalty of 30 million or imprisonment not exceeding 10 years or both. Then there are other offenses, like if you fail to comply with regulations provided for automatic exchange of information, then there's a fine of 50 million for each day you default to provide that information. 50 million for each day. Then also there is a penalty requirements requiring people to use electronic receipting and invoicing. If we know of IFRIS, which we are supposed to use, as long as you are VAT registered, you are supposed to issue IFRIS receipts or physical receipts and invoices. If you fail to do that, then URA has powers to close your business, part of the business, or all of the business for 15 days. They give you 15 days to see whether you comply or not. And there are so many other offenses that have been put in that law, like defacing tax stamps, forgery of electronic receipts, failure to use electronic receipting, and the penalty is 30 million or imprisonment for a period not exceeding 10 years or both. And finally, the Tax Appeals Tribunal has also been amended to increase the number of members from 4 to 8. So which means now the Tax Appeals Tribunal will have 9 members, including the chairman. And 40% of these members will have to be women. And I believe this is going to make the work of the Tax Appeals Tribunal faster, so that if you have a complaint, it will be handled faster. So that is a positive development. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter, for making things simple. You know, Albert Einstein said it is easy to make simple things hard, but it's very difficult to make hard things simple. But Peter has done the reverse, summarizing the tax policy and the numbers to be able to digest them in a simple manner. Though I was quite scared in the last slide on compliance, 50 million per day. Is that a strategy to keep us in the middle income or? Anyway, so members, thank you for being a good audience, including those online. I think now we are done with the presentations. So we just have 2 things between us and our homes. One is a panel discussion where we'll open this discussion to involve the audience, and then we'll have closing remarks after that. So those are the only 2 things we have. So allow me to introduce the panelists for today. And I will start with the ladies first, with the Commissioner, Domestic Taxes, Ms. Chelengat Sarah Muzunjo. Sarah's tax career spans over 20 years, involving tax assignments covering tax health checks, income tax compliance, tax accounting, computations, VAT, business, tax advisory, transfer pricing, and so many in that field. Before joining URA, she was a tax director at E&Y. And prior to joining E&Y, she had also worked at Uganda Revenue Authority in the domestic taxes department as a senior tax auditor. And she also has advanced her tax knowledge with a postgraduate diploma in tax administration. She draws her wealth of experience from URA EY on tax advisory services in different sectors, including financial services, insurance, NGOs, oil and gas, and telecommunications. Sarah has built regional experience, having worked on assignments with other revenue authorities in East Africa. She's a member of the Technical Committee on Taxation Economic Policy at the Institute of Certified Public Accountants of Uganda, which handles tax proposals, budget proposals, and lobbies with the Ministry of Finance. She's a certified member of the Institute of Chartered Public Accountants of Uganda, and also an affiliate of the Chartered Institute of Taxation of United Kingdom, where she was awarded an advanced diploma in international tax. She holds a bachelor's degree in commerce, majoring in accounting from Makerere University. Over the years, Sarah has developed leadership skills from various trainings while at EY and also in other institutions. Please, members, join me in welcoming Sarah. Take her seat. Continuing with the gender balance, I also introduce Dr. Ruth Binzika Musoke. Dr. Ruth is a private sector development specialist with over 15 years of experience in designing and implementing multilateral donor projects in areas of skills development, trade development. Ruth is currently the member of the board of the Presidential CEO Forum. Ruth was recognized in 2020 among the top young leaders in the country under 40 years. Special recognition. Deserves a hand clap. Ruth also sits on various boards of the private companies, and she's a regular panelist for the KFM radio talk show, Hot Seat, every Tuesday. Ruth, you're most welcome. And since I'm doing introducing the ladies, I also introduce Judith Eroni, who will be moderating this session. Judith is a partner in International Development Advisory Services at KPMG. She has over 18 years of post-qualification experience in providing advisory services to clients in both public and private sector in East Africa region. Her primary focus is international development, where she manages projects funded by multilateral and bilateral agencies, governments, foundations, and private sector projects, among others. Judith is a fellow of the Association of Chartered Certified Accountants and a member of the Institute of Certified Public Accountants of Uganda. Most welcome, Judith. Since we are now, aligning to the gender balance, Dorcas and I decided to swap. So Dorcas will introduce the male panelists, and then after that, she will hand over to Judith to take us through this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Benson. I will invite Dr. Muhumuza, Fred Muhumuza, who I had introduced earlier, to join the panelists. And that leaves Mr. Moses Kagwa. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce a gentleman that taught me the tax law that I practice today. He is the Acting Director, Economic Affairs with Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development. He has over 20 years of experience in tax policy. Ladies and gentlemen, join me to welcome Moses Kagwa to join the panelists. As he joins, Judith, I will hand over to you to start the panel discussion.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'll take this opportunity to thank you for investing your time with us at KPMG and accepting to spend this time with us to analyze the important aspects of the budget that was presented to us today. Today we have an amazing panelist before us that will be speaking to the theme of this year's budget. They've all been introduced, so I won't go into any other introductions. These distinguished ladies and gentlemen will provide insights based on their specific expertise and exposure in both the public and private sector. And key to note is that every budget is exclusive to a specific needs of the country. And that is what we've heard from the presenters who have given their specific insights before us. So this year's budget comes at a time when the country is trying to recover from the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic that have been experienced socially, economically, and politically. So our goal here today is that whatever your role is in this country, be it in the public or private sector, you will take away something from the discussions that we are having this evening. It could be a new idea, a fresh perspective, or a new strategy that will take you miles ahead in the business or personal undertakings that you're currently doing. So we'll take a few minutes for each of the panelists to give us a general view about the 2022-2023 budget that was presented to us today. And then we'll kick off the conversation with a focus on some of the high-level themes and trends that we should all be thinking about. And then finally, we shall open up the floor to give you, our audience, an opportunity to ask specific questions that you've been thinking about to help you navigate the upcoming opportunities and challenges, and hence be more successful in your respective businesses or areas of operation. So without any other further ado, ladies and gentlemen, kindly join me again to welcome our panel of 4 distinguished ladies and gentlemen. So Fred said he'd sit next to me so that I favor him, but I won't accept that. So I'll start with Ruth. Yeah, Ruth has been introduced, but Ruth is very passionate about helping people build their financial base, save and invest wisely. And she also has very interesting analogy that comprises 3 facets. I won't tell her where I got it from, but she usually talks about the heart to keep you moving, the brain to make you think about your business in ways that other people have not thought about it, and your hands to keep you working so that you can make resources for your business to survive. So Ruth, over to you to give us just a general brief in about 3 minutes in regards to the budget that has been presented to us.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am glad to speak to you this evening, and please thank you for summarizing me. I do a lot of motivational talks, so my videos normally go viral on a number of things. And what I speak is what I try to do as well. Sometimes I learn, sometimes I don't do those things. I also sit and learn after doing the videos as well. So I want to speak to you. Normally when I speak, I use the normal experiences that I go through as an entrepreneur, but also as somebody that supports businesses. There are businesses, companies in this country where I sit on the boards. Some of them are family businesses where you find a husband and a wife. Some of them are into the high and some are into mostly the top medium-sized companies, but also some other few. So normally when I try to speak, I always say I demystify whatever that I speak to ensure that people are able to quickly understand it. So when I was reading the budget, normally, if we do remember 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and the budget is going to be read, people would sit and say, I'm going to, now the budget, let's sit and wait what the budget is going to. But this time around, I think this period came at a time where the prices were already too high. Everything is extremely, I think we have never been in such a situation. I have a business in the hospitality sector, and I know, for example, when you have fast foods, somebody wants a chapati. You know, we've been talking about chapatis, and I think you had a viral conversation about the chapati, didn't you? And I can tell you, if you're making a chapati, you need the wheat, you need the oil, all right? And all these things, the prices have gone almost 50% or 60% more. But the customer is not willing to pay for it. The cost of gas, I'm just speaking about what Ugandans normally go through. The cost of gas, if you're just running a restaurant, has almost doubled. The cost just of gas. Even charcoal, a sack of charcoal. And when I speak now, I'm just talking to a normal food chain restaurant that maybe employs about 100 staff. But what about a typical factory, a large factory that depends on importing a number of inputs and the cost of fuel, just fuel, it must just be fuel. But I can assure you with fuel, you have people that are affected. For you when you're importing your things from Mombasa, but even your staff, when I was speaking to a number of workers, they said, we wanted to see what is going to happen because my salary is still 500,000. My salary is still 1 million shillings, but I need to pay for more transport. And this is the economy that we are looking into. So for me, I think that what came out, I don't really think that people who have that kind of challenge got the answer. However, there are some sectors that we saw the answers, and I want to thank the Minister of Finance. We do a lot of work with them as PSFU. One of the critical things we are so hardened about was the tourism sector. And we saw allocation of more resources in renovating, building more roads, but also branding Uganda, because a lot of money, a lot of jobs were lost in the tourism sector. There are critical areas that we are keen on, like digitalization, and I will talk about it later. And the issue that companies are facing is that the cost of internet, even phones, telecom, because we are saying we have to go digital. It is something we are promoting electronic, but I am telling you, it's extremely very expensive. It is only in the reach of the large companies, and we did not see a lot of interventions in that particular area. Now, the other issue that we looked at is that if we're already struggling with finding markets for some of our products, and with the issue of the low tax base, why don't we think about probably opening up and looking at other markets apart from Rwanda, which was playing around us? We said we need to look at Congo, and I'll talk about it later. And I think that for me, in the budget, those that went into the background paper, you see that there is more target for the government to see that the infrastructure to DRC Congo is given priority. And security, to us, it's important. Some of you might think it's political, but you don't know how much we lost with Southern Sudan. We lost a lot of money. we have a number of companies that lost billions and billions of Uganda shillings, even in dollars, because they used to do a lot of importation to Southern Sudan, a lot of export to Southern Sudan. And I think one key thing we want to reemphasize to the Minister of Finance that even as we say, and even as the president doesn't think that traders are doing a lot of work, we now have a formula. We are saying, why don't we transform Kasita traders to traders of Uganda who trade, who import, who export Ugandan goods. Any manufacturer, let's say Mokwano, is not good at trading. They are not good at that. Why not transforming our traders here who have been getting things from China and being able to support them to now trade, do the export to Congo, to Sudan, and support them. And we have such programs. And I think we need to look at that. It's not only about coffee, it's also about building the infrastructure for promoting exportation, turning our traders. The one we have in Chikubo that, sell all these Chinese products into trading into Ugandan products. And I think that access to finance, we looked at the money allocated in access to finance, right from parish development model, Myoga program, but again, we are still struggling with UDB. The money is there, but there is a missing middle that is not provided for by Myoga. They are too small for Myoga. They are too big for UDB, and they are in the middle. So I think we need to look at them. The 10 billion, 100 billion that was put in commercial banks, it's still inaccessible. And I think the Minister of Finance, you need to look at it. The banks don't have the appetite of giving out that money. They are either saying Bank of Uganda is so rigid, or I talked to an MD yesterday who said, we give out this money and then Bank of Uganda has to check, and it has cancelled out almost 40% of whatever we gave. It said it doesn't meet the requirements. So I think the Minister of Finance need to look at that. But again, 100 billion is still not enough for a number of businesses. It's a good start, but I think access to finance being a key issue for supporting our businesses, I think it's very, very critical for us as well.
Okay. Thank you, Ruth, for those interesting insights and giving us a reality check on what is actually happening on the ground. So we'll move to Mr. Moses Kagwa, the Acting Director, Economic Affairs, Ministry of Finance. Mr. Kagwa has been introduced as well, but something interesting about him is that he advocates for taming habits when things get tough. I was reading one of the speeches that he made at a certain function, and I'll quote one of the things he said. Prices may go up, but if goods are there, people can get them, but consume less. So it will be interesting to hear more from him in respect to the actual realities on the ground. Over to you, Mr. Kagwa.
Thank you so much. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I just want to say that we are living in very exciting times. Yes, they're exciting because they are challenging times. And I've had some people say that we've never been in this kind of times. But for some of us who have been around and lived in the war times, not amidst time, in the war times, when goods were being rationed, when so many things were not available. Yes, it showed the resilience of the human being, that we can be resilient when we are facing challenges. So the advent of COVID-19 really disorganized our planning. It disorganized the projects we are supposed to have had that time. We have looked at what Dr. Mums has told us about debt. But you can imagine in 1 year when you are projecting revenue and you have a shortfall of 2.5 at a time when the health situation needs very urgent reaction. What could government do? We had to borrow money at that time. At the advent of COVID, we really borrowed heavily to finance the treatment, the prevention, and all the related things that happen. And I think everybody saw that it was a good thing at that time. That's why you saw our debt rising so rapidly. We also had to go and get commercial debt, which we shouldn't have had if it was in normal times. And commercial debt, the repayment period is so short that you find that now we are suffering with that because we have to pay high interest. And I think Fred has mentioned that when we go to next year, we are going to have interest cost of about 6 trillion. Though in the budget, it was about 4.6 trillion, but it's going to actually be about 6 trillion. So all that has some background. And as we are looking forward, we say in this kind of situation, what are we going to do? And that's why in the budget, as we've had, the theme is the full monetization of Uganda's economy. Because we know a lot of people, 39% of the households are in subsistence and they're not producing for the market, so they cannot buy any goods from businesses that are trying to recover, and they always need a lot of assistance. So there's that full monetization of the economy, and we are pushing commercializing agriculture, because it was mentioned at the beginning that more than 70% of our people derive their livelihoods from agriculture. So when you have agriculture, which is not commercial, and people are still in subsistence, then you cannot even think about any market, because we are talking about the East African market. But if you are not producing for the market, you can't, even if they allowed you to access it, you will not be able to. We have the COMESA market. Now we have the whole African market that we are negotiating. So if we have commercial agriculture, that's why we're thinking we should be going in terms of making sure that we are more productive and we can be able to sell whatever we are producing outside, and then expanding and broadening services, because we see the services sector improving. And I think we are looking at how the service industry can actually play its role, tourism, ICT, and so on and so forth. And then digital transformation, because that is the way to go. We are using mobile money, we are using the international payment systems. So, and we want to go to e-procurement, because if you're doing e-procurement, you stop the human interaction, which has been one of the causes of corruption, so that everything at least is done online, and that we are sure will also help in improving government services. So what are we actually looking at is to kickstart the process of getting the households who are still engaged in subsistence agriculture into commercial agriculture. We are support businesses and households to recover after what I've mentioned. And then we are also enhancing security, because everybody knows what has happened. We don't take security as something important, but if you know what has happened when these things come, the people who are killed, and the businesses, you know, they don't like noise. When there's some bad noise, they disappear. We are trying to fight corruption. As I said before, that is something that businesses also don't like. And then the sustenance of the economic recovery, the parish development model that we are having, the small business recovery fund. Yes, we have looked at it. The uptake has been low, and we are thinking that maybe the conditions we put in place are actually inhibiting. It's actually 200 billion, not 100 billion, but it's for the small businesses which can't go to UDB, which can't go to the microfinance support center, because that's for micro, and also the ones which can't take a MIOGA, because a MIOGA is for medium. So we are really looking at that. And then, of course, the PDM will cover the household, the 39% households in subsistence. Of course, we are looking at also human capital development, because this is something, and I think the president mentioned it today, that when you get about 1.5 million kids in school in P1, by the time you reach P7, you have only about 700 or 800,000. So there's that missing. Where are they? So you need to do something about them. Otherwise, they're not going to be productive. And then we are looking at public sector efficiency. It is something that people are complaining about, but we are trying to make sure that we rationalize government and to align it to the programs in the National Development Plan 3. I can stop here for the time being. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kavuma. Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Kagwa, for those insights. We look forward to getting more insights from the Ministry of Finance based on what has already been presented before us. So we'll move to Ms. Sarah, Commissioner in URA. The little bit I know about Sarah is that she lives, breathes, sleeps, and talks tax. So if you have any issue to do with tax, Sarah is the right person to consult. And one other interesting bit is that she's also advocating for gender-based tax. I don't know how she does that. But yeah, so Sarah, over to you to give us just a brief in regards to the budget that was presented to us today.
Thank you so much. Good evening. Good evening, clients. You are all clients to Uganda Revenue Authority and clients to KPMG. We are all taxpayers in this room, and the budget presents tax issues that interest all of us. But specifically for this year, it's interesting that we really don't have new tax measures. Peter was presenting and he was like, the minister said there were no tax measures, but somehow in streamlining the tax measures, maybe we changed one rate or another, but generally there are no new tax measures. We are cognizant of the economic times and what is prevailing in the economy. And like I would say, tax, you cannot tax what is not there. You will only tax what is there. If it is income tax, we will tax profit. If it is indirect taxes or transaction taxes like VAT and excise tax, consumption. So with this inflation and high prices, definitely if consumption comes down, taxes will go down. But what we all know is that all governments depend on their citizens to pay tax so that they are able to finance their budgets, so that they are able to finance or provide services to its citizens. So in government's effort to deliver this social contract, it surely depends on you and me, being patriotic citizens to support our country and pay this tax. Many of us will see the infrastructure in the whole country that has greatly improved. I was lucky to do upcountry station visits for all URA stations in the country. And there are so many beautiful roads that has been constructed, electricity and water. We just need a stable economic climate for Ugandans to be able to do business, because there is transport now, which was not there before. And then with the EAC that is coming up, we really expect a lot. But again, like you saw in the presentation by Assad, that these are really factors beyond Uganda, beyond Kenya. It's an economic problem. So we must strive hard to survive in this economy, but at the same time, we must be able to do our part of the bargain and pay some tax. So the budget is looking into enhancement of tax compliance and use of digital solutions to enhance compliance. URA has deployed a lot of investment in digital systems to improve compliance. We are looking at simplifying the tax systems so that, like for simple taxes, like presumptive tax, paying your road license, driving permit fees, you really don't need a tax agent to do that. You can do it on your own. Getting a TIN, you can get an instant TIN even without an email address. All we need is a NIN and your telephone contact. So we are trying to see how best can we as a tax administrator support taxpayers in these hard times. We are also looking at policies like ADR, alternative dispute resolution, so that you are able to save taxpayers the fees that they will incur on legal fees and other fees related with the litigation in courts. And then we are looking at flexible payment of tax following the onset of COVID and all its impact. Flexible payment of taxes, and you also noted the tax exemptions that have come along that government brought in, especially in strategic sectors. Strategic sectors include IT sectors, on top of manufacturing, tourism, hospitals, etc. So this is really something that government is looking into. We have hope that the FDI, FID on the oil, in the oil and gas sector will change the picture. And already we are seeing something. So we pray that really this oil will be the game changer for both tax collection and also the economy. We are also happy that many Ugandans are participating in this as subcontractors, and this will be good for all of us. Thank you so much. Over to you.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you for giving us a glimpse of hope. Because I remember during Fred's presentation, he mentioned that he was not going to give us a lot of good news, but at least we are getting good news from another angle. So I will now move on to Mr. Fred Muhumuza. Fred spoke before, but a little bit about Fred is that he sometimes mentions that he became an economist by mistake. And that was because he forgot to include physics as one of the subjects when he was going to sit for S4. So he had no option but to add geography and economics to math. And that's how he eventually became an economist. But I guess he's doing very well in that sector. And one of the things that puts Fred off is when he's seated somewhere and people who either know little or nothing about a particular subject analyze it and pretend to know what they don't know. So, ladies and gentlemen, rest assured that the responses that Fred is going to give you have been well researched because he tries to walk the talk. So, Fred, we've heard about the rising inflation, which will fuel, or which has already fueled public discontent and prevents an improvement in social stability. Elevated global commodity prices following the COVID-19 disruptions and Russia's invasion of Ukraine will translate into increased inflationary pressures in Uganda. How are the rising commodity prices likely to hamper the realization of the government targets?
Thank you very much, Judith, for disclosing how I ended up where I should have been actually. It's my teacher who forgot to include my physics. And those days, the careers master, you'd pass a paper with all your subjects and you go away. So I imagined he had put everything. I even went ahead and did physics in senior 4. Only when my pass slip came back, physics was not there. And then the teachers told me, you did a subject you didn't register for. That's when I realized I had not done the physics, or it had not been registered. But my students got distinction once. So I could have been an engineer, and what a boring career that would have been. Because engineers build the Nile Bridge and go away. They don't have to come back to check. For years it is there. But economics, even what you thought you had in the morning, by evening has changed. That's what inflation is doing to us. So please, when you go to a restaurant and they give you a meal, pay immediately. If you wait to pay at the end, the price might have changed upwards. So you better settle that. What are these prices doing to us, and what might they do to the budget? I think Ruth has mentioned some of these. One of these is the real income effect. And real income is really saying, before inflation went up, bread was 4,500. So out of 10,000, you would get at least 2 loaves and something else. Now bread is 5,300, 5,500. So out of 10,000, you can't even get the 2 loaves. Now that means practically you are poorer. Even with your 10,000, in real terms, you are poorer than the 10,000, but nobody has taken any money from you. Now, as that happens, people are going to consume less, because I would have consumed, as long as my 10,000 hasn't changed, I cannot do the 2 loaves. Now that means my sister in domestic tax will get less. Beans may not see me at her eating point, because now I have to shift to the cassava joint. And not just because cassava is bad food, but cassava is sold where there is no ambience to pay for. You see it, not only Ruth arranges nice tables. She has to pay for those tables. She has told you she has staff, she pays 500,000. Downtown, we don't have those stuff. So we are going to shift there because we want to balance out things. The chapatis we are now eating, somebody said they are actually transparent. These guys can't change the price, but they have made the chapati thinner and smaller, because down there it's not a price issue. I still want my 2 chapatis out of 1K. So what this guy has done is to make them smaller, because the oil has gone up, the wheat has gone up. But as these dynamics work out, the real incomes of the people will decline, the demand will decline. So some people have to shift. And these are the realities we tell people. It might be worthwhile to change where you sleep. Park that car and go by taxi. If you can walk there, please do. 1 meal a day, by the way, you'll not die. Who said there must be 3 meals? And who told you proteins in beans of lower quality than protein in fish? So these are the adjustments the population is making. And they are genuine conversations and adjustments, but they are certainly going to affect the projections that we had on fuel, the projections that we had on businesses, recovery and performance, and you want to factor this into consideration. But I'll end with one interesting thing. We're still saying Ukraine was invaded by Russia. Now, the other day, I don't know, M23 is not a country, but it literally invaded the DRC. Now, you all know that Uganda has troops fighting alongside DRC to pacify the other side. Now, at the time we began this budget, a liter of fuel was 3,800. I want to believe that's what the Minister of Defense submitted on the basis of the liters they need at a cost of 3,800. Now, they cannot reduce the number of liters they are going to use, but they need an enhanced budget. So while the revenues of government are going down, the expenditure of government is going to go up to do exactly the same thing. How are we going to balance out some of these things? And the realities really, which make me proud now to be an economist, because you sleep and you think you have solved the 2 + 2 is 4. When you wake up in the morning, there is a question from the teacher, which base did you use? It can only be 4 if it is base 10. If it was base something else, you go back to where you began. That's the beauty with economics. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred. Very good analysis there. So I will still maintain my comment that you were made for economics and not for physics. So back to Dr. Sarah Biezika. Sorry. Back to Dr. Ruth Bienzika. So on February 2022, Uganda announced the final investment decision for its oil and gas resources. The FID unlocks the single highest value project in the country that will bring an investment of close to $15 billion in the next 3 years. Ugandans are excited that this investment will unlock the many opportunities for businesses. A business is ready to harness the opportunities from the oil and gas sector when you look at it from the private sector perspective.
Thank you very much. I don't know why I was so excited about talking about DRC, but you should. No, seriously, I was very excited about talking about it. But anyway, FID is also very exciting for us in the private sector. And actually, right now, companies have started signing contracts. We have just requested the Chamber of Mines and Petroleum to officially get a list from Total and Sinop. We hope actually to have a meeting with the president on the 30th of June, because we said Uganda is so negative at times, and we thought we could share the good news with the president to show him the list of Ugandans that are actually getting business as I speak right now. And it is very interesting that some of them are young people that are winning contracts in, various services, logistics, welding, the pipe, the work, the piping work for the oil is very complicated. But I can assure you, surprisingly, we got Ugandans that were ready for it. And it's very good money actually. Scaffolding and the pipe work, it's quite interesting. And we have a number of companies that are doing that. We are getting companies, I think a number of them this coming financial year will be signing contracts for construction. And I think what comes to me when we talk about FID is normally people talk about things and they never think they come to a reality. I remember in 2016, when we talked about this, a number of Ugandans thought, I think it's just news. The way we talked about, remember when COVID came? And before it killed even my boss at PSFU, Gideon Badagawa, we thought it was a myth. You get it? The same thing with this. I remember in 2016, we did not have in the country any training institution that would train and certify people for oil and gas. That was 2016, I remember. And I remember we engaged the government as PSFU for support in skilling. And I've actually been running a skilling program. And we've done a lot of work in oil and gas. We have trained a number of Ugandans to drive the trucks, the heavy duty trucks. For oil and gas, to be able to drive the truck, you must have ESC, curriculum training certification, which we did not have in 2016. Right now, as I speak, you can now go to Safeway right away if you want to drive that. But why am I saying this? Because if there is business in the logistics sector, transport, your staff must have certification for oil and gas driving, which is the ESC curriculum, and it wasn't here. So we supported institutions like Safeway Right Way, Uganda Drivers Network. They now can do it. The government gave us money to buy them large trucks for training, which is now happening. And it has made it possible for our companies, Ugandan companies, to use this staff as they are bidding for work. By that time, we did not even have Chigumba. Some of you have heard about the Petroleum Institute in Chigumba. Their diploma was not enough to work in the oil and gas sector. They wanted City and Guilds. They wanted Opito. They wanted the one for American Welding Society. We did not have it, and it was not possible for a company in this country to bid. Again, working closely with the government and the private sector and a number of players, we managed to train a number of Ugandans. We trained about 10,000 now, according to the database we have, who are doing scaffolding, pipe fitting, working under the sea. Working in oil is complicated. Can you imagine getting down in the water to weld that pipe? It's not easy. It's very complicated. And as I speak right now, apart from having Chigumba, we have Nakawa. You can go to Nakawa right now, and you can be able to have training and be certified. You can go to Chiriandongo. You can go to Kabasi. A number of them, Muni University is starting the first degree and diploma in welding engineering. And this is just happening right now. Why am I talking about it? Because in the private sector, human capital development, workers, is among the top 3 needs for the country. And those companies that want to do business, if you did not do that, if you did not invest in training your workers or invest in getting the right workers, it is now hard for you, because still the numbers we have are not yet enough. There is a lot of money for catering. If you go to where the downstream is happening right now at the moment, many people are coming in. I think in the next coming 1 year or 2, you're going to see a lot of expatriates coming in, and they have various standards for food. The way you cook it, the way you pack it, the way you serve it, you have to follow a number of various things. And for Ugandan companies to be able to do that, you have to go through particular training. I also know that as auditors and people who advise taxation, I am sure you have trained in oil and gas. I hope so. You know what Ugandans normally do? When they see it coming, they say, oh, now let me train. It's already late. I want to start contracting. And then for you as a taxation guy, you're saying, it's now my time to go and study. You are studying, but the guys are signing contracts now. You should have studied before. So for me, I think that right now where we are, the opportunities are there. Even where the pipeline is going to pass, there will be a lot of opportunities. And what we need right now for Ugandans is very good tax and business advisors. This country we have has a challenge with a number of lawyers that know what they are talking about. You find a lawyer who pretends to know everything, and you're making people in businesses make mistakes. You give them comfort. No, it's okay. Don't worry. This one don't pay to pass. You don't have to go through this, but you don't know. You guys, you never go back for training. Even guys in the accounting section, when you get a CPA, you get an SCCA, you think it's enough. It is not enough. Things are changing every single day, and you are not going back for upgrading. Why? And you are the guys advising us. Sometimes we are in business and we are so relaxed. And that is why we are saying that future government programs, skilling programs, we should also have money for professional services so that you guys are able to go back and are able to upgrade. We have opportunities in the real estate sector. Many, I think, previously, guys spent a lot of money in the real estate and they used to say, oh, we don't have the tenants. I think in the next coming 1 year, and even right now, the demand has gone up. If you look at the Knight and Frank reporting, you see that the rates are going, and they are going to go up because the demand for housing, and right now, additional contracts are going to be given for construction in the area, in the oil and gas, in the downstream where it's happening. So those opportunities are there. If you ask me, are Ugandans ready? Some are ready. Some are not. Some are still sleeping. Have they done enough? I think some have tried. Some have even gone ahead to find partnerships. Because when it comes to local content, even if you have your local, even if it's just your local audit firm, why not partner to another to just give you that competitive advantage? You have the local content, you have the international experience as well. I think some of them are ready. Some of them already signing deals. Some of them are sleeping. Do we have enough financial resources to support the companies? I think some are struggling because some of these contracts, like one I know, some I know, we have a list. They need a lot of resources. And at the moment, we have challenges with affordable finances on the market. We have now had challenges with equity financing, venture capital. It's still a challenge. And the regulation is actually affecting investment in venture capital, which we really need to look at. And I think if I say, are people being assisted enough to understand the opportunities? I think the Petroleum Authority is now trying to do so much, but we need to do a lot more for people to understand and appreciate so that this doesn't pass like chogom. We want to ensure that people are able to say, when we got oil in Uganda, this is how we benefited, because it's not going to be here forever. It is just short term. We need to plan after those 15 years or 20 years when we are no longer having. Where will these people go? Even the guys that we have trained in oil and gas, those jobs will not be here forever. So we need to plan and see what happens. The same thing that happened in COVID, where a teacher sat at home for 2 years without having a salary. If you only knew how to teach, what do? We are teaching professionals to look at skills diversion to ensure that if there is a change in my local language, they say, Embera wechuka, now okolachi. So for you guys who are here in this room, what happens when the oil is no longer there? But even again to you as I speak to you, is there anything extra that you can do? Nobody ever thought Ukraine would be destroyed in just a few months. What happens if Uganda is in the same state? What can you do? And then you find yourself in Cambodia. You can't speak the language. They don't want you auditing. What can you do? And for me, that is extremely very critical for these particular, companies to think through when they get the money, how can they be able to diversify and think through after the future?
Thank you, Ruth. I really, really love your passion when you're speaking about some of these things that really affect most of the Ugandans in the current setting. We'll move to Mr. Moses Kagwa. So unemployment remains very high, especially among the youth. The unemployment rate for young people aged between 15 and 30 and 24 years of age is around 83%. And according to a research conducted by the World Bank, about 34% of people who enter only 34% of people who enter the job market are absorbed, meaning that the others do not have opportunities to get employment. So how is the budget addressing this challenge?
Thank you for the question. I think I'll be brief because I'm seeing a lot of exodus out of this room. I will not contest the figures because the figures we have are slightly different on unemployment of the youth and how many people get jobs. But one of the challenges I think that we are trying to address is that a lot of youth don't have skills. I think it's just been mentioned, it has been mentioning it, that they don't have skills. If you're a teacher of history, that is your whatever, and you don't have any skill other than that. So there is a mismatch between what people actually learn and what the market demands. So then too, there are so many people who don't have skills at all, and they have not even had those soft skills. Because at least if you are educated, you can go and work in a supermarket, you can work in a restaurant, you can work somewhere, you can be trained to become a tourist guide. But then if you're not at all educated, those people who drop out of school before they even qualify for PLE, that is a difficult lot. So what is government doing in this budget? One of the things is that you look at those people who actually have no skills, who have dropped out, but you can train them. And the vocational training programs that are there are meant to address those skills gaps so that people can become good carpenters, people can become plumbers, like we've said, people can become good electricians, and they will be able to either self-employ themselves or be employed. So there is a lot of emphasis in the budget on centers of excellence in vocational training, which are going to help the youth. The second thing in the budget, of course, is continuing to emphasize the education, that people should, as much as possible, remain in school and get some qualifications. Because if we have people who are dropping out at 14 and then by 15 or by 19, a girl has 3 or 4 kids, then that is, she's going to find it very difficult to get jobs. So keeping these people in school is one of the things that we're looking at. The other area that we're actually looking at are the funds that we have put in place to assist people generally who are unemployed, but also including the youth. The Small Business Recovery Fund though it has not worked very well so far because it has a lot of requirements which some people are not meeting. So we are thinking about relaxing these conditions. They are the small businesses which the youth usually start, employing about 5 people up to 49 people. Those ones are being helped to recover. There's the EMIOGA, the talent groups, and there are so many of these talent groups where the youth can fit, the carpenters, the hairdressers, the artists, the PWs, and so many. There are 18 EMIOGA. So that is also going to help, that the youth who can get jobs can be self-employed when they have got access to capital. We know one of the biggest challenges people have is the startup funding. We have also, of course, got money generally in UDB, which can help the businesses, the big businesses, to recover. But those big businesses are going to help in employment. And when you look at the statistics of UDB, the businesses which they have lent money have employed more than 150,000 people, mostly youth. So that is also a good program going forward to get this. Then in the commercialization of agriculture, 2 things are going to happen. One, there are big farms, or what you call nucleus farms. They do employ a lot of people. And so we are supporting them through UDB and through UDC, where UDC is partnering with some of them. And they are employing some of this. They will employ a lot of the youth. 2, there will be the outgrowers scheme, where a lot of youth, especially women and youth who don't have a lot of land, can actually be employed. So those are some of the things that have been highlighted in the budget, and as far as employment is concerned. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kagwa. That gives a bit of hope to the youth out there. So what you're telling us is that not all hope is lost in terms of how we can get our youth to be more productive and more useful to the economy. My final question will go to Sarah. So Sarah, in your remarks, you gave us quite a bit about the tax perspective in regards to what has been talked about in the budget. So I'll just ask one general question. How is the Uganda budget supporting survival and recovery efforts of businesses and citizens at large?
Thank you, Judith. One is that, as already discussed, we don't have any new tax measures. Specifically this year, we just wanted to do streamlining the tax policies and clarifying here and there areas where there were gray issues in the law. However, generally, there are not new tax measures. We've also looked at exemptions. We've talked about stamp duty exemptions, excise duty exemptions, exemptions on VAT that have been introduced just to ease up what is happening in the economy. And then we are looking at government also introducing now, increasing the number of members at the TAT tribunal. And the impact of that is that TAT can now have 3 sittings at a go compared to the one which has been there. And this is going to help a lot on issues of tax controversy and fast tracking those court cases. We also have the alternative dispute resolution where we are finalizing the regulations, and this will ease, especially taxpayers who have issues of controversy but are not able to go to courts of law. But we can be able to sit with them and discuss and come to a middle ground on what is really payable. We are looking at a flexible payment program as tax administration to again ease the recovery of the economy, especially sectors like schools, tourism sector, which were adversely impacted by COVID, and other sectors that were feeding into those sectors. We are giving them a flexible payment arrangement. And then, like you noted, in the past years, there was a relief on interest and penalties that had accumulated on tax arrears up to 30th June 2020. That one is also there. And then there is voluntary tax compliance or voluntary tax disclosure. If you voluntarily come and disclose your taxes, then we are able to waive the interest and penalty. We work closely with the Ministry of Finance, and we are able to do recommendations, especially to taxpayers who are really struggling with their tax costs, and supporting them to recommend for waiver of interest and penalty. So generally, there are exemptions within the regime, again, that are for income tax, VAT, we have stamp duty and excise duty, and VAT. So all these are for strategic sectors that government feels will be able to help us inspire this production in the economy. For example, the manufacturing entities, hospitals, tourism, IT, CIT, all companies that are investing in CIT, companies in the logistics sector, all these are being supported to be able to invest. And specifically to support our own companies that are going to participate in the FID, specifically in the construction sectors and other sectors. There are also exemptions that are unique to that area. And this is, we as tax administration, we are keen in supporting especially these companies, because we want to support through Build Uganda, Buy Uganda. So it's really in our interest that the taxes should automatically self-policy themselves, and if consumption is improved, then we are able to collect more tax. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Sarah. Very interesting insights there. I'd like to thank all the panelists. Our apologies, we thought we'd have some more time to interact more, but it looks like time is not our best ally. Yeah, I see, I can see Dr. Ruth is itching, but yeah, we'll get some more time when we can interact and maybe share more insights than what we've been able to share today. So I'll hand over the microphone to Benson, who will coordinate any questions from the audience or from the other viewers who are attending virtually. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judith and your team, for breaking things down for us. In the interest of time, I'll go straight to the audience. They have been patient. Majority of us are still here. We shall only allow 2 questions from the audience here and 1 question from the online group. And then the rest, if you have any other question, feel free to share it. We shall compile responses in the tax briefs that we'll be sharing with you. Only 2 questions. My co-MC seems to have, she's there. So only 2 questions. Feel free to raise up your hand and we'll bring the mic to you. So you say your name, where you work from, and whom you want to address the question to.
Okay, thank you. I'm Stephen Chikule from NSSF. I had many questions, but I will stick to 1 or 2. The first one is to Sarah. Thank you, Asad, for congratulating us on attaining middle income status. But out there, people keep asking, where is the money? And I think there's consensus because of the Paris development model, that perhaps the money is not among the masses. And the issue is how is this money distributed? And I just want to know whether URA has taken time to study that, even as it tries to increase the tax base. Because if you want to increase your tax to GDP ratio, but you're doing a mass targeting of increasing the tax base, whereas you may find that the income distribution is not that wide. My question is, from your time there, the little time you've spent there, is the concentrated area where this money is pulling its weight in the tax base? And if it isn't, what are you doing to ensure that the people with the concentration of income actually pay their fair portion of tax? The second one is, forgive me, the timing of some of these interventions, as Dr. said, he seems to say we are in ICU. In a short time, we may be like Sri Lanka. But then I hear an introduction of 35% tax threshold on things like cereals, yet we already have the chapatis disappearing. Is this the right time for such interventions? And what are the things we can do to get us out of this quickly before we end up in the mortuary? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's take the last question and then they will answer at once. And okay.
Thank you very much. My name is Senta Runa, Lake Victoria Hotel in Nairobi. Questions would be very many, but I'll stick to just one, to Mr. Kagwa of Ministry of Finance. You have given us some solutions to unemployment of the youth, including those programs of Myoga and the others. And you have talked about commercialization of agriculture as one of the keys in today's budget. I would like to put a question to you. What is the government doing, the government itself, to commercialize agriculture? Seeing that the government has got resources to put up farms, commercial farms, and employing the youth who we see nowadays, they are going to countries in the Middle East in search of jobs. Yet the government knows that agriculture is one of the economic activities that can bring in employment and can bring in income. What is the government doing to see to that? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I'll read the last question from the online audience. And this will go to the economist by default, Mr. Fred Mumza. So the question is, this person didn't mention their name and where they work from, but it's an interesting question. So there is usually a delayed reaction of economies to the global macroeconomic environment. With high debt environment in the region, do you see potential defaults in the region? Thank you. So maybe we start with Sarah. So the first question was addressed to you. And then after that, we'll go to Moses Kagwa, and lastly, Fred. And after that, Judith will close the session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Benson. And thank you, taxpayers, for being very patient with the time. I will try to answer my question, but I will request Mr. Kagwa to pick up some things which I may leave out, especially on Myoga and how it's performing. Generally, what I can say is that taxing the informal sector is a global problem worldwide, and specifically to sub-Saharan Africa. The informal sector is characterized by poor record keeping. It's characterized by migration of taxpayers. You go today, you issue an assessment today, not even an assessment, you go and assess and register, give a team. You come back after a month, you issue an assessment. When you come back after another month to demand the tax, it's a new name in the shop. New name, you say, I'm looking for, say, Tony Mukasa. The person says, I don't know that Tony, maybe Jamal Musoke. I don't know. So that mutation of taxpayers creates a very big problem for the revenue authorities to tax. And like I was saying, even those who are already there, because of poor record keeping, they don't know whether they are making businesses, profits or not. So again, coming back to the Myoga, as requested by Stephen, generally businesses have a life cycle. So even if government brought in this fund last financial year, remember we were still in COVID, the economy was fully opened in January and fully opened in February. So nothing really, there was nothing substantial that took place in the last financial year. I'm hoping that maybe this year we should be able to get, but if you look at the performance of the revenue collection, presumptive tax, which is the tax that we use to tax the informal sector, performed at its worst, was the worst performing among all the tax heads. It's a simple tax head because we tax based on turnover, just 1.5% of turnover, or a fixed fee, which can be paid in installments. But it is still very difficult to impose this tax paying culture to this population of ours. And remember, just if you look at what the president was saying, a very big number of these people in the informal sector are semi-literate. They don't even appreciate. So we are doing a lot of sensitization, a lot of tax literacy campaigns through radios, through tax clinics, and just to make sure that people are able to appreciate why they must really pay this tax, even if it is 100,000, but are you proud to contribute this money to your government so that they are able to support in providing these tax services? So, Stephen, what we can say is that we are still grappling with the taxing the informal sector, but it is still a very big focus area for us because we really look forward to widening this tax net, tax base, so that everyone pays a fair share of this tax to increase on our support to the budget. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for the questions. It had two parts. One, I think you are talking about the CET, the common external tariff rate, which has moved from 25% to 35%. And one of the reasons is that the businesses in East Africa have been complaining about the cheap imports that are coming in, especially from Asia. And they said the 25% protection is not good enough when they are faced with a high cost of capital, high transport costs, high cost of electricity. So they said, well, we needed a little bit of more protection. And even before this, we have had rates already at 35%, but there have been ad hoc. Every year we take them up. We go and say, allow Uganda to charge these products 35% for 1 year. Allow Kenya to charge for 35%, even 60%. Some products have been attracting 60%, especially agricultural products, that allow them to be at that rate for 1 year. So this is actually now being restated and it's becoming permanent, and said instead of countries coming to ask for these extensions for 1 year, let it be put in the law. So I don't think there is really much of a change in the tax regime other than also aligning what we have been doing in practice. On the issues of how is the money distributed in Myoga, are we going to tax? It's very difficult sometimes to identify taxpayers in economies like ours. 51% is informal. So how do you really identify these individuals and bring them to book? But there are so many things that are being used. There is, for example, a project on taxing high net worth individuals. If you are buying a cross country 2022, URA will pick you up and try to follow what has been the source of your income. You are buying a car worth 1 billion shillings. So what is the source of your income? If you can't explain your income, then they'll be able to tax you. There will be an assumption that you have earned money and you have not paid. So you will pay on that. We also use withholding tax a lot, though it has been resisted in agriculture, but in other areas where people are supplying to big companies, there's a withholding tax of 6%, whereby if you think that you shouldn't have paid that, you file your returns with URA, and they will either refund that money or they will add on the tax that you're supposed to pay. There is also paying taxes before licensing. For example, if you have a truck and you want to pay with the Transport Licensing Board, before you license this truck, you must show that you have actually paid your taxes. Otherwise, they will not register your whatever. Then we are using third-party data. For example, there is data in Ministry of Finance on contracts that payments have been made to contractors who may not have registered with URA. So with that data, URA will be able to follow those taxpayers. We are also working on a study on the informal sector, which is actually showing that there are some big taxpayers who are hiding into the informal when they shouldn't be there, that they are small, but they're actually not small. So this study is having a lot of revelations. Hopefully by next year, we'll have completed it for purposes of the budget. That's why we said we may not need to increase taxes, but to identify the loopholes where they are. And lastly, we have under the parish development model, there is what you call a community information system, whereby we are going to be collecting information on communities, who has what in a parish. So we are going to know all economic activities in the parish. That's why we have employed all the parish chiefs, and then the committees of the parish development model. They'll be able to give us information, and they are working with UBOS and the Ministry of ICT to make sure that this information is available. So because once you have the information, then you can be able to do a lot of things. Mr. Sentamu Aruna, you asked about what government is doing to commercialize agriculture. Shouldn't it put up agriculture farms? I think that question should also be, why isn't government putting up hotels? Because it's a business. Why isn't government in hotel business? If you want it to be in agriculture. But one of the things we have known is that government is not a very good a business person. We have seen what it does with businesses. And a lot of times in this area, we are doing a lot of regulation, doing regulation and providing what you call an enabling environment. But that said, you may say, where is government? Government, for example, is in Soroti Fruit Factory. Soroti Fruit Factory, it is working with the community to produce the fruits which can be used in that factory. It's part of us. So we are in UDC. Government is in UDC in some areas, not in all areas. It has, sorry? Okay. It has intervened in some areas. I've told about Soroti, Atiag Sugar Factory, government is there. There is Amoro Sugar Factory, that government is going to be there. We are going to partner with Dieri in, she's on Oyam, on the also the fruit processing factory. So government is involved where it sees that there is a need to support. But generally, government should be in policy making, in regulation, and in providing an environment for businesses to thrive. Because we are not very good at making money. We are more at doing that, our regulation, imposing our taxes, and so on and so forth. Thank you so much.
I think mine was the easiest. Is governments in the area, in the region, about to default? I'm yet to study others, but at least Uganda has signaled that it is determined not to default. By the time you commit 35% of your budget to debt management and service, you are saying, I would rather default on other citizens' demands, but not on my creditors. This is the opportunity cost we talked about. So you'd rather not pay the teachers. Even now they have issued another letter saying their strike starts tomorrow. Now, if we pay the teachers, we would have to default on the creditors. But the message is very clear. The Ministry of Finance is saying, I would rather negotiate with the teachers, even when those discussions take 4 years, than negotiate with my creditors. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fred. I think with that, the lender is a king. So, I think with that, I would like now to call upon Judith Eroni to give closing remarks. So we've come to the end of the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Benson, and thanks to your co-MC, Dorcas, for a job well done. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you all for having honored our invitation to be part of this budget dinner. We at KPMG do not take it for granted. We know it's late, it's past 10 o'clock, but some of you are still here with us. And that goes to show how you value the discussions and the people that have been taking us through some of these discussions. It's been a great honor as a firm to host all our different clients and interact with our different technocrats. We would want to thank our panelists again, Moses, Sarah, Dr. Ruth, and Dr. Muhumza, for your time and for all the insights that you've shared with all of us. We'd also like to thank Peter and Asad, who have given us a greater perspective in respect to the budget that was read before us. Many times when we look at the budget documents, for most people, it looks like it's too complicated, especially when you look at the detailed document. But when you get people who understand both the local, regional, and global issues and help to break it down and unpack some of the things that help us to be able to understand some of these things better, it's not something that we can take for granted. And to all my KPMG colleagues who have worked tirelessly behind the scenes to make this event a success, we really, really want to thank you for this. You know yourselves, I know you're all behind there. So as we come to the end of this event, we at KPMG pledge our continued support in unlocking some of these tax and economic issues. I cannot say that we've been able to unpack everything this evening because of the limited time that we've had. And as you can see, we are not as many as we started. So kindly do not hesitate to contact any of us in case you have any other issues where you feel that you need to be able to get further insights to help you to make certain decisions for your businesses. So at this point, I will say by the powers vested into me by my fellow partners, Stephen Ineget, Asad Lukwago, Peter Chambade, and Edgar Isingoma, I would like to declare this function closed, as I wish you all better days ahead. And as I ask that we all continue working collectively to make this country a better place for the future generations to come. Thank you all, and God bless you.